Now, folks, let me show you the disclosure, and this is where you're going to have a big ol' epiphany, okay? I'm going to show you this, and you're going to realize, you're like, oh my God, this is exactly what Seth said it is, right? This sounds exactly like Seth explained agency to us. That's what's going to happen in your minds. So there is a copy in your online portal, but there's also, you can always go to publications on the Real Estate Commission's website, which is ncrec.gov. And then you go down here and you look at disclosure forms and the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure form. And so here's where you've got to understand a couple things. Now, before I read this to you, folks, go back to the scenario where I said that Bill was acting as a seller subagent. Bill would have had to give this buyer, the unrepresented buyer, I don't remember who it was, would have had to give them the Working with Real Estate Agents disclosure. He would have had to explain that they were unrepresented. And folks, if that buyer still, after the fact, had given Bill confidential information, what would Bill have done with it? Where I was the listing agent, he was acting as a seller subagent through cooperating brokerage firms. Told the seller. More specifically, he would tell me, and I would tell the seller, because that's not his person. So he found out customer confidential information. He would be responsible for disclosing it to his client, which is my seller. And a lot of times when I teach this, people feel really bad. They're like, oh, but that poor buyer is going to be taken advantage of. Folks, you're not going to feel bad for him once I read this to you. Beard hair. Struggle's real. Don't judge me. So here's what it says, okay? It's a one-page document. One side for seller, one side for buyer. First and foremost, this form is required for use in all sales transactions, including residential and commercial. Critically important, okay? Sales transactions only. Not property management, not working with tenants. Those aren't sales. But sales transactions, residential and commercial. This is the side for sellers. Here's what it says. This form is not a contract. Signing this disclosure only means that you have received it. I've told you this never, ever, 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 ever creates an agency relationship. Goes on to say, in a real estate sales transaction, it's important that you understand whether an agent represents you. Real estate agents are required to, 1, review this form with you at first substantial contact, meaning before asking for or receiving your confidential information, and 2, give you a copy of the form after you sign it. This is for your own protection. Ready for this? This is why you don't feel bad for customers if this was done appropriately. It says, do not share any confidential information with a real estate agent or assume that the agent is acting on your behalf until you have entered into a written agreement with the agent to represent you. Otherwise, the agent can share your confidential information with others, just like the Miranda rights for real estate. If you're not hiring us, don't tell us your secrets, stupid. Pretty straightforward. Point blank period, right? Okay, well, so far, so good. It sounds like everything I've taught you. Now, this next piece says, okay, well, note to the agent, check all relationship types below that may apply to the seller. I'm going to zoom out so you can see the different options here. What do you think that means? Check all types below that may apply to the seller. It says the agent is informing the customer of who they represent.
It will represent how he's going to work with that client.
It's not how we're going to work with that client, because this is not forming a relationship. This is simply telling them what could happen. So which ones do you think we're going to check here? Not all, necessarily. Let me help you out. Anything that our firm offers. Folks, did we or did we not say that there are some firms that only work with sellers and some firms that only work with buyers? So if we're a firm that only works with sellers, seller agency is an option, but dual agency nor designated dual agency could ever arise, could it? Because dual agency is when the firm represents the buyer and the seller in the same transaction. If we only work with sellers, we will never be able to do anything other than exclusive representation. Does that make sense? So if our firm offers it, we check the box because that means it could arise. So for most firms, yeah, we're going to check the three: seller, dual, and designated. Now here's where it's going to sound exactly like I taught you, because when I said seller agency, think we only care about the seller, we don't care about the buyer. Doesn't mean they're not represented. So here's what it says. Seller agency means a listing agent. The agent who gave you this form and the agent's firm must enter into a written listing agreement with you before they begin to market your property for sale. If you sign the listing agreement, the listing firm and its agents would then represent you, the entire firm, right? The buyer would either be represented by an agent affiliated with a different real estate firm or be unrepresented. Folks, does that sound like exactly what I taught you about seller agency? My God, it does. Okay, well, let's try dual. Dual agency will occur if your listing firm has a buyer client who wants to purchase your property. If you agree in a written agency agreement, the real estate firm and any agent with the same firm, meaning the entire company, would be permitted to represent you and the buyer at the same time. Here's the kicker. A dual agent's loyalty would be divided between you and the buyer, but the firm and its agents must treat you and the buyer fairly and equally and cannot help you gain an advantage over the other party. Bound and gagged and worthless. Does this sound like what I taught you? Mm-hmm. 2 for 2. Let's go for designated. If you agree in a written agency agreement, the real estate firm would represent both you and the buyer, but the firm would designate one agent to represent you and a different agent to represent the buyer. Each designated agent would be loyal only to their client. Go for blood territory. Still sounding good, right? Mm-hmm. Now, of course, the last piece is you don't have to have an agent. And so if you are talking to a for sale by owner whom you're not representing, you still have to disclose your agency status. More specifically, if you're a buyer's agent talking to an unrepresented seller, when would you have to disclose your agency status? Buyer agent talking to a seller. When would you have to disclose your agency status?
Immediately.
Initial contact. Initial contact. So if you're talking to a for sale by owner, you would still check this box and give them this, right? The agent who gave you this form will not be representing you and has no loyalty to you. The agent will represent only the buyer. Do not share any confidential information with this agent. Now, it goes on and asks for the seller's signatures. Now, this is another thing that students screw up royally on the test. Folks, this is not a contract. We ask them to sign it solely so they acknowledge that we did our legal obligation and reviewed it with them. But if the test question says a seller has to sign it, a buyer has to sign it, that's not the answer. Has to is a very definitive word. How am I going to force somebody to sign something if I don't have a relationship with them? I can't. So if I hand this to somebody or review this with somebody, right, and I say, Sinful, sign this acknowledging that I've reviewed it with you, and Sinful says, I'm not signing nothing, you weirdo real estate man. I'm going to make a note of it. Consumer refused to sign, reviewed it with him on this date and time. But I can't force them to sign. Be very careful. If the answer on a test says they have to sign, no, they don't. We ask them to sign, but signing it is purely acknowledging that we reviewed it with them. Everybody with me? And remember what I said. This never, ever, 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 ever creates an agency relationship. Just here's how this works. So this is step one, right? We say what options exist, and then step two is, well, let's form an agency relationship. Now we're going to get there. Folks, this is the buyer side. Notice that everything's identical, right? Required in sales transactions, including residential and commercial. But I want you to look right here. I want to see, listen, y'all have been thoroughly impressing me thus far in the agency section. Look in this section right here and see if you can spot the one difference between the seller side and the buyer side. It's one difference, one word only. Nope. Can share is the same. I mean, if the other one says may, then that's just a typographical thing. I mean, it's the same for all intents and purposes. Not otherwise. Nope, not assume. Not agreement, but getting closer. There it is, Bridge. It doesn't say written. Why? Because listing agreements always have to be in writing. But we said buyer agency agreements can start out as what? Come on, Jackie, let me down on that one. Oral. Yeah. Oral. So that's really the only significant difference. Because if you look at the buyer agency side, it says, if you agree the agent who gave you this form and the agent's firm would represent you as a buyer's agent and be loyal to you, you may begin with an oral agreement, but your agent must enter into a written buyer agency agreement with you before making a written offer or oral offer for you. The seller would either be represented by an agent affiliated with a different real estate firm or be unrepresented. So key difference there, right? Because you can start off with an oral buyer agency agreement for a period of time. Dual agency, designated dual agency, read the same. And then here's the other one, folks. This is going back to the Bill scenario, right? Where Bill was the seller sub-agent. And I do not remember, was it Cheyenne or somebody who did not want to be represented? Whoever I used. This is what you would give somebody when they look at you and they say, I don't want you as my agent. Just show me the pretty house. This says unrepresented buyer, meaning I'm working as a seller sub-agent. The agent who gave you this form may assist you in your purchase, but will not be representing you and has no loyalty to you. This agent will represent the seller. Do not share any confidential information with this agent. Folks, does this sound like exactly what I've been teaching you for the past almost 4 hours tonight? Yet again, we ask them to sign it, but we can't force them to sign it, and signing it is purely acknowledgement that they have been reviewed it. So this never creates the agency relationship. The next step would be, let's form a relationship. That's the next step. And we do that with agency agreements. Now let me show you something else, which I think will help you grasp a concept, okay? There is, once upon a time, they used a different working with real estate agents disclosure, and it was confusing, it was crappy, it was terrible. Thank God they changed it. But they didn't get rid of the old one in its entirety. What they did is they changed it to what we call a Q&A brochure. In other words, to help you understand a concept better, they create Q&A brochures. And they did one on agency. Folks, what they did is they took the old brochure and they basically added freaking pictures to it. because this is such a confusing concept that students struggle with it, consumers struggle with it, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I've heard other educators in the industry struggle with it, and it's kind of pathetic. And so what do you do to fix it? You give people pictures, which is how we teach 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, because why else would you not? I mean, what else would you do, right? So let me show you this. Here is a fantastic visual helping you understand these relationships. In this picture right here, this is exclusive representation only if these are two different brokerage firms. Let's just say, because the colors match, this is Keller Williams, this is Cole Banker. This Keller Williams brokerage cares about the buyer exclusively, does not care about the seller. This Cole Banker cares about the seller exclusively. This is exclusive representation for both parties. This is called cooperating brokerage. This is the most common transaction in the industry, where one firm represents the buyer, one firm represents the seller. There's no conflict of interest. Exclusively representing one, exclusively representing one, going for blood, right? Going for blood. Everybody okay with that? Okay. Well, earlier in the scenarios I gave you, I think Paige was my licensee who I used to teach dual agency. And so I asked if Paige got a phone call and somebody said, Paige, we want to work with us too. Could Paige work with both the buyer and the seller? The answer is yes, with informed and written consent. And this is what it would look like. This could be one licensee of a firm. This could be the sole practitioner who is on their own little island. But either way, they can do dual agency. But I want you to notice what's happening here. They're holding hands. Folks, holding hands, you're not advocating, right? You are singing Kumbaya by the fire. It was a very non-adversarial, non-advocaty thing. We're all friends here. Now, this is what I like to call true dual. Will you see this term on the test? No. Because for all intents and purposes, this does not act any different than this. So this is where I told you, Bridge and Page in the scenario changed nothing. Because this is one firm, two licensees, everybody's holding hands, bound and gagged and worthless. Kumbaya by the fire. Doesn't matter who knows what, nobody can use it. So I'm telling you, this and this work exactly the same. Cannot help, cannot advocate, cannot do none of that. Worthless, 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 worthless. And then you have designated dual agency. Same color, same firm. We've now drawn a line in the sand. They're not holding hands anymore. That's when we have intentionally created this adversarial, back to advocating line. But you can never default to this on the test. You would only go to designated if they use the word designated. If you said they were able to advocate, if you would have to have some word indicative of it's going to be designated. So, as opposed to switching gears for the last few minutes, let me give you a couple examples to help you understand some of the topics in here, okay? Let me just go... I'm trying to think. Let me see if I can just zoom in enough to give me some white space here. That's just going to be the best thing I can do. Yeah, like right here. That's cool. Folks, I want you to imagine that I am an agent, okay, a real estate broker, and I am one, right? So you don't have to imagine. Hey, guess what? I'm a real estate broker. So there you go. No imagining necessary. Now you just know facts. So I want you to imagine that Barry, okay? Barry picks up the phone and Barry calls me. And Barry says, Seth, hey, listen, I found you online on Zillow and you seem like a good agent. I want you to help me. I have a house I want to go see. And I say, well, Barry, thank you so much for noticing. I'm actually the best. And I appreciate you acknowledging that. He says, cool, whatever. I'd like to go see 123 Main Street. I said, great, Barry, I'll meet you there. Back to 123 Main Street, folks. Okay, it's late. You can't expect too much. All right, deal with it. 123 Main Street it is. So I meet Barry at 123 Main Street. What is the first thing that I'm going to do when I meet Barry? What do you think? This is WWREA. Why? Give him that. There you go. What's up, Barry? What's up, my man? How's it going, dog? All right, there you go. Why do you think we're giving him the disclosure?
He's going to tell you about what his price range is and other details in order to get you to show him houses at.
Yeah. There you go. Folks, I want you to understand something here, okay? Because this slightly, but it's going to make sense in a second, slightly contradicts what I just taught you. Because I told you the working with real estate agents disclosure is required in all sales transactions, residential and commercial, at first substantial contact. Well, the North Carolina Real Estate Commission clearly states that if you're about to show them a house, you've had first substantial contact. Why? For the reasons you just brought up. I'm probably going to need to have conversations about, has he gotten pre-approved? How much house can he afford? Has he talked to a lender? Does he have money to put down for due diligence? Right, we're going to have those conversations if we're house hunting. So inherently, if you are about to show somebody a house, first substantial contact is happening. Does everybody understand that? So I am going to give Barry the working with the real estate agent's disclosure right then, right there. Even though he hasn't said anything, I'm about to show him my house. Confidential territory is coming up. So that's going to be the deadline. So I'm going to say, well, Barry, hey, listen, here's the working with the real estate agent's disclosure. Okay, it's this written disclosure. Understand that, there are buyer's agents that I could be your buyer's agent and advocate for you if you hire me and look after your best interest. There's dual agency, which is when a firm represents a buyer and the seller in the same transaction. Can't really help or hinder either party. There's designated dual agency, which my firm practices. And so we could still look after your best interest, and I could be your designated agent, and the seller, would be represented by our firm, but they'd have a different designated agent. Or listen, Barry, you don't have to hire an agent, and you can be unrepresented. Okay? And so I asked Barry to sign it. Whether he signs it or not is irrelevant, but I asked him to sign it acknowledging it. Folks, here's the question. Do Barry and I have a relationship yet? No. Because the working with real estate agents disclosure never, ever, 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 ever creates a relationship. So what's the next step? Yeah, an agency agreement. Now, Barry's a buyer, so it's going to be a buyer-agency agreement. So here's what I'm going to say. Barry, now that we've gone over this, listen, I'd love to be your agent. Will you let me represent you, Barry? He says, maybe. I said, well, listen, Barry, you've got options here. We can sign a written buyer-agency agreement from the word go. But if that makes you uncomfortable, Barry, we can have an oral buyer agency agreement, which means that we agree to work together. I'm going to talk terms with you and, of course, explain it all to you. And it's non-exclusive and it's open-ended. Which would you prefer? And Barry says, let's go with the oral buyer agency agreement because that makes me feel a little more comfortable that I'm not really bound to anything. I said, okay, Barry, no problem. So here's how this is going to work. And folks, I want you to understand this is how legally a oral buyer agency agreement is supposed to work. Barry, I can represent you and be your buyer's agent in an oral capacity from the word go, but we would have to reduce it to writing whenever you wanted to put an offer in on a property. Also, Barry, we have to discuss whether or not you're going to authorize dual agency. Dual agency will arise if my firm wants to see, or if you want to see properties that are listed by my firm. Of dual, we could potentially practice designated. Also, Barry, please be aware that I'm going to seek to get 3% compensation for assisting you in a transaction if we end up getting you under contract. I'm going to look to get that compensation from the seller or the listing agent first, but if they don't pay me, I may be looking at you to make up the difference, and we will outline that on the written buyer agency agreement. You see how we are expressing the terms. Even though it's oral, I'm telling him everything he's getting into. That's the express piece. And when I go through all the details of dual and compensation and when it have to be reduced to writing, and I say, well, Barry, are you good with all this? And Barry says, yeah. Now it's official. We have an oral buyer agency agreement, but it's not exclusive and it's not for any period of time. Barry can cancel in 5 seconds. We could go see 700 houses together, but it would have to be reduced to writing when? Yeah, prior to Barry making an offer. Also, going back to what Bill said earlier, the most official piece of the oral buyer agency agreement, after we agree to it, we got to go. And if we don't, it doesn't count, right? It doesn't count. No, I'm kidding. That's not apart from the commission. That's not tested. We'll leave that out. Now, folks, it's getting down to the wire, so I'm going to finish the point here that I'm getting at. Okay, let's say that we go and we see the house and he loves it. We see a house and he wants to put in an offer. And I look at him and I say, all right, Barry, we talked about this. You ready to put in this offer? Great, I got you. Remember, now we have to put it in a written buyer agency agreement in order for me to put this offer in for you. And here's what Barry says. Barry says, signing stuff. I don't, I said, what's wrong, Barry? He's like, what? Seth, it's just this. I got this thing. I got commitment issues. I don't really want to sign that. I'm going to say, Barry, dog, come on, man. We talked about, I can't put this offer in for you, Barry, unless you sign this buyer agency agreement. He's like, no, I'm not going to do it. No. And so Barry refuses to sign this written buyer agency agreement. Here's my question. Can I put an offer in for Barry? I could. But not as, there you go, Lena, not as his agent, but I could switch teams and become a seller sub-agent because you only have to be a written buyer's agent to put an offer in on behalf of a buyer. Folks, a seller sub-agent can put together an offer for the buyer. We're not going to give him advice on that offer. And I want to show you this, and I'll probably go into this a little bit more in depth tomorrow. If I go back to the syllabus, where is it at? I want you to see this. Just like somebody asked earlier, if you could switch from a seller sub-agent to a buyer's agent, yeah, and you can equally switch from a buyer's agent to a seller sub-agent if they refuse to put it in writing. So switching from seller sub-agent to buyer's agent, and it goes both ways. So if he refuses to put it in writing, I cannot represent him as a buyer's agent and put in that offer, but I could switch teams if seller sub-agency was authorized and still put it in that offer. But folks, that would be exceptionally ill-advised. Why?
Would that not be a conflict to the seller?
It's not a conflict to the seller. They're about to be really sitting pretty. Why? Who was I representing up until that point?
Oh, you know all his information.
There you go. Barry was my client. And I owed Barry old car. Even though it was an oral buyer agency agreement, I owed Barry old car, which means he told me his motivation. He told me how much money he had. He told me all his secrets, and I had to keep them secret. But the second he says, no, I'm not going to sign this, if I switch teams to be a seller sub-agent, Barry is screwed. Because now he's a customer, and I owe all his secrets to the seller. This is not advisable in any way, shape, or form. So Barry would be best to just finish the transaction the way that it was supposed to happen, right? Now, like I said, folks, is this a common thing? No. I'm just helping you understand the concept of who do you represent. If it's not one, it's got to be the other. And if it's neither, you're not in it. You got to have a person in North Carolina. What you got?
Barry would have to give you permission to do that, right?
Well, Barry, I would say, Barry, I can't put in the offer for you as your buyer's agent unless you sign this. If you want me to submit an offer for you and you're not going to sign the buyer agency agreement, the only way I can do that is as a seller sub agent. And I'm going to look Barry in the face and say, then my loyalties have changed, Barry, and I have to share your secrets with the seller. And if he says, I don't care, yeah, I'm going to do it. I mean, once again, very ill-advised, but it's, you know. I'll give you a few other scenarios tomorrow, and we'll build on this, folks. I mean, this stuff is exceptionally complex. There's just so many moving pieces.